Did Dr. Phil get caught in a lie live on his very own television show? On a recent episode of the Dr. Phil show, he highlighted a pro-life, pro-choice panel and actually represented the pro-life position properly, unlike our friend Emmanuel Acho. And it didn't take long for this conversation to get contentious. But oddly enough, it actually got contentious with the biggest voice in the pro-life movement, who challenged him on the definition of when life begins. Instead of addressing and refuting her claim, he said this.
I haven't spoken over you, and you keep speaking over me, and I assume that's because you don't want me to finish.
So on this video, we'll be reacting to a clip from this discussion and answering the question, regardless on where you fall on the pro-life versus pro-choice conversation, did Dr. Phil lie on national TV?
Ruslan.
All right, guys, we are going to be jumping right into this clip. This was a part of a longer form conversation. It got super duper dicey, but this is the part that really stood out to me. So Dr. Phil hosted this conversation, and he actually had Layla Rose on here. And Layla Rose is one of the leading pro-life voices in terms of activism. And she's debated all types of folks really about having the conversation and leaning into it. And so Dr. Phil had her on, which kudos to him for actually representing the pro-life voice properly. But then this is what happened.
That life begins at fertilization, that science is very clear about that. And you have to know science isn't, there's no consensus among the scientific community.
There is, Dr. Phil. 96%
no, actually,
of scientists
not.
say that life begins at fertilization. If you're an in vitro specialist, you're looking to create
let me
a
finish.
single cell embryo, and then you know you have a new human life. So it is a scientific fact.
Well, actually, it's not.
Well, when do you say human life begins then?
It doesn't matter what I think.
So, is this Dr. Phil trying to mansplain this to her? And then second of all, she asks him the question, well, when do you think life begins? And he responds very interestingly.
It's a scientific fact.
Well, actually, it's not.
Well, when do you say human life begins then?
It doesn't matter what I think. I don't care what I think.
I don't care what I think. That was his response. I gotta hit him with
You guys think I'm stupid. I'm not stupid, guys. I know this.
I don't care what I think. That's literally what came out of his mouth. Because he's pressed on it. When do you think life begins? When do we draw the line of when something is a clump of cells versus a person, a human with dignity and rights and protections? Interesting, right? So let's watch the rest of this.
What I'm saying is the scientific community does not have a consensus about when life begins.
So that is his claim right here. That's his claim right here. We're just put a pin in that. We're gonna come back to that idea because that's his claim. The scientific community doesn't have a consensus. Okay, remember, this is his claim.
Accurate. It's simply inaccurate.
That's not true. You can go to the body
A single cell embryo is a
That's not true. You can go to what?
unique new human life.
You can go to the body of scientific literature, and you can find neuroscientists who say that it begins when there is a detectable brainwave.
But Dr. Phil, in an abortion, if it's not a human life, why do you have to kill it?
I haven't spoken over you, and you keep speaking over me, and I assume that's because you don't want me to finish.
No, Dr. Phil, it's because this is network television and everything is in these short bursts of time where if you don't get your word in, you're gonna get caught off. This isn't a podcast, 2-hour-long conversation we can go into depth. You guys are creating a network television, and this is probably gonna be chopped up in a way where she isn't able to properly respond, even if she did let you finish because of time constraints. That's why she's cutting you off, and she's smart for doing so.
My thought, which is, if anyone here wants to fact check me instead of speak over me, you can.
Oh, really? If anyone want to fact check, I got you.
Go to the scientific literature and query what the definition is of the beginning of life, and you will find that there are different definitions. And it's up to you to decide what you think.
Aha.
But there is not a consensus among the scientific community. And it has actually evolved across time. Before we had sonograms.
He's actually making our point for us, by the way. He's making the pro-life point for us right here. It's actually evolved over time when we got what? Sonograms.
It was a black box what was going on in there. Then when we got to the point we had sonograms and we could see, oh, you can detect a heartbeat. Okay, now, up until then, it was referred to as quickening.
When a baby would kick.
When you could feel the kick.
Around I believe around 8 weeks, 7 to 8 weeks.
That was the beginning of life. And then we got better technology, and then it started to change. But you say it's at fertilization, but at fertilization, there actually hasn't been implantation. And then once there's implantation, then this is a process. And all I'm saying is there's not a consensus. And you're saying there is, and that's factually inaccurate.
We can agree to disagree, but I will say, when I was
But the
pregnant
literature doesn't disagree.
Well, we should look it up. It's 96% of scientists have agreed when surveyed. But regardless of that point, I think the question is, we know deep down when you're pregnant, there's a new human life. That's why it's so devastating for Nancy. Our miscarriage was so devastating. We all know that deep down. These are human beings. That's why it's so contentious. And listen, do we acknowledge that all humans have human rights? Because I think what your question is about
I
is
agree
about
with a lot
personhood.
of your points. I'm just saying it comes down to when that life begins.
But I don't think Nancy or others here are saying they're not human beings.
The real
Okay, so, hey, give this video a like for the algorithm. It really does help out. So let's evaluate Dr. Phil's point. There's no scientific consensus and where she's pulling from, which, by the way, there's a couple different sources on this. So this is Daily Citizen. This is a faith-based source, but they're citing a non-faith-based study. Life begins at fertilization. 96% of liberal, pro-choice, and non-religious biologists agree. Now, you know how our modern culture has a relationship with biology. We'll come back to that part in a second. A new study has found that 96% of biologists believe that life begins at fertilization. Steve Jacobs began the study as part of his dissertation for his PhD at the University of Chicago Department of Comparative Human Development. In a recent article he published in Quillette, Jacobs revealed his findings. He also relayed the backlash he's received from pro-abortion advocates after publishing a study. In his study, emailed surveys to professors in the biology departments of over 1,000 institutions around the world. The results determined that the vast majority of biologists believe that life begins at conception. I found that 5,337 biologists, affirm that a human's life begins at fertilization, with 244% rejecting that view. Okay, now, the finding is even more stunning since the vast majority of biologists surveyed were liberal, pro-choice, non-religious. The majority of samples identified as liberal, 89, pro-choice, 85, and non-religious, 63. In the case of Americans who express party preference, the majority identified as Democrat. Dr. Phil, you said to fact-check you. I fact-checked you, bud. You were wrong. You lied. You lied, sir. This is straight out of the biologist. Now, again, maybe it's because Dr. Phil has a low view of biology, but there's another, this is Princeton. Okay, this is Princeton.edu. Princeton.edu affirms this same position. Development of the embryo begins at stage 1 when a sperm fertilizes and oxytocin together form a zygote. Human development begins after the union of male and female gyms or germ cells during the process known as fertilization. Princeton. Here's another one. Biologist consensus on where life begins. So, Dr. Phil believes it begins when you want it to begin. Well, that's rather consistent with the majority position of all things kind of being as you see fit and as you feel them, is it not? It's why we have people affirming whatever gender they want to be. This is why we ignore the biology in that regard, just like we're ignoring the biology with this conversation. Because we know, based on the biology, we know, based on the science, that obviously life begins at conception. You can talk about when is it a viable pregnancy? Is it when it latches to the uterine wall? Or was it when it before it latches? We can have that conversation. But you could talk about quickening, to his point. All of those time frames are beyond when most people are okay with terminating a pregnancy, meaning that if you talk about latching, that's like a few weeks into the pregnancy. If you're talking about quickening, that's like 6 to 8 weeks in pregnancy. If you're talking about a heartbeat, that's like 5-6 weeks into the pregnancy. If you're talking about brain waves, you're talking about 10 to 12 weeks into pregnancy. The vast majority of pro-choice advocates want abortion on demand in a more liberal, more goofy way than even the most liberal nations like France, which have a ban at 14 weeks. The majority of Europe has a ban at around 12 weeks. So this entire conversation is totally goofy. And we know that Dr. Phil is a hack, but this was the most obvious display of this man straight looking into the camera and lying. Fam, she wasn't lying. She didn't make that up. That is based on actual studies, empirical data. And so it's always interesting when we know what's to be true, which throughout church history, we know that the church has historically been against abortion. We know that that's a fact. You can't deny that. Okay, I could point you to some of the early church literature. We know what God's heart is, right? That I formed you together in your mother's womb. We know all these things, but for some reason, we need to redefine these things. And then when empirical evidence comes out, we still say, no, that's wrong. We know what a man is and what a woman is. We know they're built different, right? But this entire postmodern society is all about how you feel and what you want. And there is no objective truth. Is that a life? Is that a baby? Is that a clump of cells? Who knows? What do you think it is? How do you feel about it? Is that a boy? Is that a girl? I don't know. Why don't you ask them, was it a boy? This is the dogma of the world right now, and in their attempt to be open-minded and not be religious, they've become religious and blind in their own pursuit of said dogma, a new fundamentalism that is rotting the minds of a lot of people that participate in this. And so I prefer my pro-choice activists and my pro-choice friends just to be upfront. Yeah, that's a life in there, but I see the ending of that life as the lesser of two evils than preventing a woman's choice from going on in her career and doing what she wants to do with her body. Just keep it a buck. Just be honest about it. I prefer you be honest about it than try to move the scales, right? And when we break it down like that, what is the reasonable conclusion? The reasonable conclusion, if we're talking about that's a human life, biologists agree that's a human life, and if I have to compare a woman missing out on her career or a woman having to take a step back in her journey and her education, the lesser of those two evils, I'm gonna say, hey, woman, there's a baby inside of you, sorry, right? That's a very logical and linear conclusion when we're talking about a baby that is a baby. And it's like that joke from Netflix, Bill Burr, where he says, hey, if you're cooking a cake and someone walks in and takes that cake, that thing out of your oven and then throws it, and you go, hey, why'd you waste my cake? And they go, that wasn't a cake yet. That wasn't, right? And he says, but it would have been. You could say that's not a baby, but it would have been. You know that would have been a baby. So this stuff is so asinine and goofy to me. I'm glad that at least he hosted one person that was pro-life and had a backbone. And by the way, these types of conversations, in my opinion, are better in long form. And so I'll do my best to link up a video where Lila Rose actually debated Brenda from God is Gray. I'll pin that up. Amazing. If you want to hear a long form conversation and actually hear someone that's educated debate someone that is pro-choice and really walk this stuff out to its logical conclusions, I'll link that below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you smash that like button. I will put a link to that video in the pinned comments. Also, be sure to subscribe to our second channel, the Bless God Studios channel. There's all kinds of cool stuff happening there. All right, I'll see you over there. Peace.